And we are live.
Hello,
Hello,
everyone.
hello, everyone.
So, on this episode, let's just jump right into it. We will be discussing one, spiritual bypass, and two, compassion. And so, Ryan, let's start it off. What is spiritual bypass?
Yeah, this was inspired by comments from last week by one of my friends and students, Paul Fears. He asked, "Is there a way to work with the Brahma Viharas or do the loving kindness or compassion practice, but use it as a way to actually not deal with some of the more difficult emotions or um, even difficult things that come up in the practice?" And that's a really good question because Ricardo and I both have a very long and extensive history of spiritual bypassing. So we we're very much in a position to discuss this in full detail, actually. So, what is spiritual bypass? It's a pretty common term. It wasn't talked about so much 10 years ago, but in the last couple of years, I've seen it discussed more and more. And it's just referring to using spirituality to justify harmful behaviors, using spirituality to avoid problems. So there's often a perspective that we can use meditation or we can use spirituality to get away from our problems, have a temporary break from our problems, even escape from our problems. And I think most of us come to meditation, spirituality out of some suffering, some kind of cataclysm, or there's a kind of lack in our lives, and that really drives us towards spiritual awakening and towards picking up a practice and beginning to explore all of these topics. The thing about meditation is that once you learn to gain control of your mind through concentration or through mindfulness practices or even through so-called witnessing. So this is what's taught in The Power of Now. This notion that you are not your thoughts and that you are this separate observer from your thoughts. Um, I can see the value in that in the sense that it gives you some space from, to give you some distance from afflictive emotion. But later on, that notion that you're separate from anything is dispelled, so that ceases to exist. But this idea of observing and of being a witness, it can be very useful, especially when emotions are very difficult and you feel that you are a victim of your own mind, you're a victim of your own thinking. So that's what made Power of Now such a powerful book. It helped people finally experience that distance, have some distance between their sense of self and the things that they're thinking or the things that they believe. Now, the issue with this kind of witnessing frame is that instead of feeling emotions, you can just witness them.
Hmm.
Like instead of feeling and processing the things that you need to feel and process, you can just sit back and be an observer so that you don't feel the intensity of certain things. Like on one hand, this is good, and on another hand, this is dangerous. Like many times you should feel the intensity of afflictive emotion. You should feel the intensity of grief. And there are going to be consequences if you don't
Hmm.
fully experience the energy of an emotion and the impact of an affliction. Like I said, the way that I see things is not, it's not black and white. There's a lot of nuance here, but
Hmm.
overall, I think that separating yourself from thought, from emotion, can initially be a good thing, to give yourself some space. But it's also not exactly true, right? That you are the witness only and that you're not anything else. So the identification is shifting from thought to being the witness. And in Buddhism, particularly in Dharma, this identification structure altogether is illusory. So we have to distinguish between what's being used in the immediate circumstance to help ourselves get through something and what is actually the truth. And I think oftentimes that line, that distinguishment is not being made. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. What do you
and
what do you think, Ricardo?
when we start to practice awareness or the observer type of meditations and even concentration practices, there's always, like you were saying, there's always a witness to it, right? Here's the thoughts and feelings, and I'm just watching. In the beginning of practice, there's not a separation. It's just like, oh, there's thoughts and I'm just in it. Once we start to practice further on, there's that separation, which is great, right? Now you can start to see and watch the phenomenon of the arising and passing of thoughts. But if that just becomes the only thing that goes on years and years, you're just still watching things. You're still
Still in duality.
it's
That's the
you're
problem.
exactly
Yeah.
exactly like I'm and like I said in the previous video, which was the podcast, which was great. You understand trauma, you understand things, which is a great insight. And now what? Now what? Like in terms of yourself, like now, are you doing anything about those things? And this is where we can get into a certain avoidance to emotional issues, which is you start to maybe disconnect from it. Observation can cause disconnection because now you're observing these things. You're not quite attached to it anymore, but the it's weird because the physical body still feels the traumas and these anguish sensations, but yeah, your mind has become a little bit more refined where you can separate it. Beyond that is the observer of the observer. There's not a separation between thoughts and the observer itself, right? There's a union behind these two, which is a little bit more complicated, but it's a very difficult state. But still, it's like even that state, there's still emotions because there's no separation even within emotion, right? There's no separation between the mind and body. But what most people get caught up in is that sort of disconnect. And they can sometimes get into, oh, I feel like I need to disconnect from society. I feel like I can't deal.
Yeah.
I have like most people have this mindset of I'm different now. Like
Oh, for sure.
I'm seeing things different. I am different. And that identification causes you to isolate. That identification could cause several issues when really the practice is supposed to cause union, not
Yeah.
separation.
Exactly.
And
This is the interesting thing.
yeah,
Sorry, continue.
and kind of like going like Ryan and I have had these moments plenty of times. Again, I hated doing love and kindness practices. I learned about my traumas early on. I saw them, and the only reason why I started to practice meditation and became a Buddhist monk was because to deal with trauma. But I remember, oh my God, I remember this, Ryan, so well. I remember like I was always pursuing healing and healing and healing. And I remember one day after, I don't know, maybe like 3 to 4 years. I don't know if you remember this, Ryan, where you were just like, you just needed to let that go. Like we had a distinct conversation where
Yeah, I
you were
remember what
just
I
very
said.
black. Oh, what'd you say?
Yeah, I said as long as you have the identification of being a person on a healing journey, you're always going to be in time.
Mm-hmm. And that slapped me so hard. I remember, and I started to cry because it was true. Now, how I see it is, we think we know what healing is. We have this idea. It's like, oh, like I'm this type of person and this type of person in society with my relationships, whatever. It's just a projection in the mind that you think what healing is, and we chase that. We just constantly, okay, I'm getting there, I'm getting there. But you really don't know what healing is. You don't know what the road to healing is. It's just this projection in the future. It may actually take a lot longer than you think. It may be faster. It's such a fantasy that we have. And it's not saying we shouldn't strive for that. I'm just saying what the mind does is to get caught up in these future oriented thoughts of healing, which causes us pain, which causes us to react and do things that may cause negative karma, may cause issues psychologically too. Because now for me, I was so stuck in the state of I need to heal, I need to heal, I need to heal. I was going in circles. That caused me personal issues with relationships or relationship to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the things that can be issues for the practice.
Yeah, I can think back to that conversation and this notion in general. It's so prevalent in, at least in spirituality in the West, because a lot of spirituality here is merged with um, inner work and healing and overcoming traumas and healing the past and becoming a whole and an integrated person.
Mm.
Um, I think, and I'm sure this is becoming more of a thing in the East as well, that there does need to be an integrated perspective. Like you can obviously pursue enlightenment, but if you don't take care of some of the things that have happened in your past, or if there's still identification with that and pain there, that's going to arise and that's going to come out, and that can cause issues. So I think overall, in general, we're starting to have a more integrated approach, but because the work on the personality structure and the work on the heart and the healing, and because that's entwined with the cultivation and uh, realization that happens through meditation and through study, is difficult. One of the interesting things is, what is a result of the practice and what is your own personality baggage coming to the surface. This is a this is serious. I had a conversation with Tina Rasmussen about this, because she's been my coach over the years, or one of my coaches or teachers. And I asked her, hey, I'm having these, like, after these big non-dual openings, having the experience of, I call it I am everything. You have the experience that everything is you. The whole field of perception is you. It's I consider it like an earlier phase of the awakening process now. But initially, and when it's happening, it's freaking immaculate. It's just incredible. But on the contraction cycle, on the contraction phase of that cycle, there's this dance between being everything, having the experience of being everything that's in the forefront of your consciousness, and your personality is now in the backseat. And there's eventually a switch where you don't feel that you're everything anymore, and you very much feel like the personality structure, the sense of self, is really in the forefront. And when the sense of self was in the forefront for me during that particular period of time, I would have this like real strong sense of just being in an abyss, like just this abyss, this hollow, not the same as like emptiness as the nature of phenomena, like, I mean, just this dark night hollowness that was there. And I told Tina, I was like, this feels like how I felt when my dad died, like the hopelessness and the abysmalness. And it literally happens after every big opening. On the contraction phase, this is exactly how it feels every single time. Is this like the awakening processing that specific, like this is just what needs to be worked through? Or am I going through like an insight cycle? Am I going through one of the knowledges of suffering, like disgust or fear or whatever it is? And her only answer was like, that's a really good question. It's difficult to know whether something's coming up because it's being purified, it's something that is being processed, or is it a part of the structure of awakening itself? And for me, um, it was specific insight that allowed that dance and that foreground background split to like finally stop. But I did notice that it's interesting when you're in that abyss, or when you're in some of these kinds of like non-attachment states, or these places in your practice where you don't really care about the outcomes. That's different than being equanimous about the outcomes. Like having equanimity about outcomes is different than indifference to outcomes. And the indifference can actually be coming from a place of resistance. It's like, screw it, like I don't want to deal with it anyways. It
Mm.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens. That's very different from, actually, the outcomes are important, and every little thing I do and say, and how I treat other people, that's important. And irrespective of what the outcome is, I'm okay with it. That's very different from I don't give a shit what happens. But I don't give a shit what happens. You can really be in that, in the insight cycle. Like after a big contraction or after a big opening, and you're in the contraction phase of the cycle, you could be resting in awareness and literally just have this sense of not giving a shit. And you think that, like, that you justify that with your spirituality. You can justify your own maladaptive behavior patterns and maladaptive uh just like the negative thoughts that you have towards yourself or the way that you treat people. You could justify that with spirituality. You could say, I'm going through something. You know, like I'm going
And
through I'm going through a dark night, so I'm just gonna treat people like shit.
right. And
So
it's hard to like distinguish it, right? And uh, don't get me wrong, there's always these emotional detox that happens with cultivation. And what you just reminded me of what you were saying was, it's like you have these programs and these influences and these belief systems that's been identified within you, and the moment that they collapse, remove out of you, it's like as if they were a real person, because it was living within you, and you acted out the part whenever it came on. Now it's gone, and you'll go through these moments of grief. Oh my God, Ricardo used to be this way. What happened to him? Like it's just, you'll go through grief because this thing that was just part of your structure is now gone, right? But then there's other moments where we are kind of psychological resistances come up in our practice and cultivation, and we can see it. We see it all the time with people. One thing is, I I have seen people do this where in Mahayana Buddhism, the most famous thing is everyone's enlightened. Everyone is already enlightened. And that's true. On one level, on absolute objective level, everyone has enlightenment in them. It's already there. But to say you're enlightened is completely wrong, because you're still living in this ego state. You're still in this, you haven't purified the mind or the body. So to say I'm already enlightened is it's kind of it's a mistranslation in a way. And so I've seen people, when they say this, they justify their actions. So I can do all these things. I don't need to follow the rules of, I can steal, I can lie, I can do drugs. I've seen this
conventions of
happen.
society. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many other things that we do that's self-sabotaging in our practice, or we take what we already reacted to, or like our programs of our defense mechanisms, and we attach that to spiritual cultivation. We just masked it. Like, oh,
Yeah.
we made it look beautiful, and like, okay, it's like this now.
Yeah, it's like if you're actually, so let's look at life before someone has a spiritual awakening, right? And they're already a person who's a little different. They've always felt a little different. And now they've had a spiritual awakening, and now they have a reason to actually see themselves as different from other people, and as separate. And this is oftentimes talked about for people who are newly having entering that spiritual orientation in life, and they're starting to get into all of this stuff, whatever it is, new age, it doesn't matter. And they describe this feeling of being alone, like people not understanding them, not understanding the things that they're thinking, or not understanding their interests or the things that they're going through now. And that's really because the spiritual process is being interpreted through a sense of self. It's still being interpreted through the framework of an I.
Hmm.
And that's really the cause of the separation. Now you have a special I. It's not the ordinary I
The
that it used to
golden
be.
eye, the
Yeah,
golden
exactly.
statue.
It's the I that is going to ascend to, Andromeda, and get beamed up into space and go to the fifth dimension. That I, all of that is what makes you feel separate. So
And
it's really the stories around the sense of a me. Yeah. So before,
this
you told people tell themselves worldly stories, and then later they tell themselves spiritual stories, but they're still stories.
Yeah, and this reminds me of the reason why we practice love and kindness, because one, it not only starts to deal with your issues, and so you can feel it. It's very human. There's one thing with emptiness, which is it's emptiness. It's detachment almost, and it's not detachment, but in the beginning it feels like that. Where in love and kindness, you it's very it's a very grounding practice. It's very human. You can function better in society with love and kindness, because you start to the energy starts to you spread it outward. You can interact with people, interact with your relationships much better. Emptiness, oh, everything is empty. Detach. I see. I'm aware.
Go to the cave.
Go to the cave. And
Yeah.
so love actually helps you be able to function better in society in that way, and deal with the issues much more gently. Now, it's like, how do you know if you're practicing love and kindness correctly, right? It's how do I know if it's not that type of like fake love, or like a self-created love? In the beginning, sometimes it's like that, right? Until it starts to purify itself. Or we each have had a moment, whether that's in ourselves, whether that's for a person, maybe you're on drugs, but we all had a moment where it was like, wow, I feel unified, I feel love, I feel this togetherness. That is a feeling that needs to be generated. It's not like, oh, I received this idea that everything is love, all the books, all the Bible, the polycanon, all these holy books say love people. Okay, I'm gonna do it, and we try to force it, or we try to logically influence our practice in that way. It's not like that. It's about bringing in that sensation, that feeling into the practice. And so I don't know how else to kind of explain it in that way. You know, a lot of the times I can see people try to force love, because they're used to forcing just things in general, and that's another cause of disruption of any type of practice. It's like, okay, force love. Okay, force awareness. Okay, or I need to feel love. Oh my God, I can't feel it. This sucks. Like there's something wrong with my practice. Or like later on in someone's practice, oh, there's so many thoughts. Oh, there's something wrong with my practice. You know, like some days there's storms. Some days it's beautiful. That's how practice is. Some days it's very calm, and some days it's very like relaxing and beautiful and blissful until eventually it starts to solidify and refine.
Yeah, I think with loving kindness, compassion, or with any practice, there's a premature judgment that can happen, premature assessment that starts to happen. Um, for example, let's say you start doing a loving kindness practice and you've done it 3 times, right? And your particular obstacle is that you haven't been able to generate love for yourself. Well, one, hopefully you're working with a teacher, or you could ask someone if you're doing it right. But that being put aside, I mean, I don't judge something until I've done it 100 times. I don't determine. I don't determine if it's not working until I've done it a lot, because I know that there's that practices and the fruits of practices can take time. Let's say
Right,
you do let's say you do a loving kindness retreat
right,
and you got nothing out of it. Well, if you sat if you did it for 50 hours or 100
right,
hours,
right.
okay. But if you just did it like 1 hour a day for 7 days, and then you made this conclusion that it doesn't work for you,
Mm,
um, 7 hours is not sufficient in my opinion. That's not enough of a deep dive. And this is how it is with a lot of practices. We're very used to immediate results, and that's just not the reality for a lot of people. Results and significant changes take time. I saw actually Nick's teacher. He wrote in his book, I think The Origin is Pure, or something about Buddha nature and nature of mind, and he mentioned that when a person begins practicing Zen, they often don't see results until they practice for 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. That's with the assumption that he didn't mention this, but that's with the assumption that you're doing it correctly. Okay. So so you can do it for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And if you don't do it right, it's not even equivalent to doing it correctly for 1 year, as
sure,
crushing as that sounds.
sure.
So I mean, one of the advices are, for example, in some Zen traditions, they just have you show up and you sit and they hit the gong and there's no instruction, and they just have this idea that you're gonna get it. And I'm pretty sure some people do get it, right? But there are people that are gonna keep showing up, and if they're just playing with their thoughts the whole time, making plans while they're in seated meditation, and after 5 years they're wondering why nothing drastic has changed, or after 10 years,
Mm,
their life is basically the same. It's because they weren't getting enough instruction, and they weren't doing it right. Some people say
right.
there's no right way to do meditation. Bullshit.
Mm.
Complete nonsense. I'll say that right off the bat, because I practiced wrong for 7 years, so I can tell you that there's a wrong way to do it.
Or like there's a lot of mistranslations and misinformation about it, especially that's presented in the West. And this isn't to say like I'm not saying the entirety of it is, but a lot of it is very much, oh, let's make you a better person in society. Let's make you let's the result of this meditation is going to make you happier.
Let's enhance you so you could
That's
be more
yeah,
efficient at work.
yeah, and that's not on the fundamental level. That's
The
not
point.
what
Yeah.
that wasn't ever the point. It was
Yeah.
that's those are byproducts of the practice, and it's those things will come, but there's moments where you're going to be angry or sad or You're not going to feel good in practice sometimes. There's been times where I've been, oh my God, I'm in fetal position, just processing something, and just it sucks, or you know. But the meditation in its fundamental level, it's really it's just awareness, or whatever the practice is. Oh, what is the ultimate goal for loving kindness? Is it to make you happier? Is it to make you more calm? Oh yeah, those are all like byproducts. Oh, so what is it? The object, this the unconditional love. Okay. Oh, what about awareness? Like, oh, does awareness bring calmness of mind? Does it bring you, like, can there be no thoughts? Those are byproducts of it. But what's the point? Just awareness. Your egolessness. That does not sell. Those things don't sell. But I feel like we're kind of like
the point is to see that your question or your concern of it having a point is just a thought.
right, exactly. And this may
an empty thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
this is really what practice and what awakening leads to when you start to really dive deep and begin to look at the mind. All of this begins to unfold and reveal itself, that the motivations for practice are based on structures. The motivation for us to get better, to improve our lives, to improve and change our conditions, these are all based on structures in the mind. And that ultimately those structures, initially we think that they define the entirety of our lives, and through practice we begin to see that they don't at all. And that's where the freedom really begins to ensue. When someone asks me what's the point of loving kindness and compassion meditation, I say the point is to open the heart. And when the heart is truly open, that is a massive fuel and a huge aspect of awakening. If you look at Buddhism, right, compassion and emptiness are never separated. Compassion is the relative view that beings in samsara exist and that they suffer. I mean, I guess you could argue, some people would say they exist, or there's this whole thing about existing and non-existing, but we don't need to get into that. But that beings do suffer, and they believe and they experience suffering. This is like what we really need to see, and this is the point of compassion. And the side of emptiness, or the view of emptiness, is to see that there's not an actual being there, that there's not an actual independent entity there, and that this view actually allows for even more spontaneous compassion and even greater understanding. Understanding and compassion are always balanced. At least in Buddhism, they're always cultivated equally. Because with compassion, we have the right motivation for practice, especially in Mahayana and in Vajrayana Buddhism. The motivation is to save and to serve and to enlighten and liberate sentient beings and to share the path with them. If we can't see their suffering, there's no motivation to do that. This is why compassion is important.
And so with compassion practice too, it's most people, I would like for them to argue with themselves and think about this. Like, do you feel like you have compassion? Is it compassion, or is it just like, oh, like I feel bad for that person? Like there's no love behind it. Like, yeah, anyone can. There's a word for it, but I'm not remembering.
It's pity. That's the perfect
pity.
That is the perfect way to say it. The difference between compassion and pity is that in compassion, there's actually love behind it.
Mm-hmm. Like,
dude,
like you're
very
like
said.
You can feel like I want to help you, or I care about you, and in the practice, when you cultivate that, you see it, you notice it, and you feel it, and it's a wild thing to see yourself and how you were before. It's like, wow, when I saw that homeless person before, I was more of a pity, like, yeah, I feel bad, and it's all right. Like, there's nothing wrong with having that before. At least we're now cultivating it, allowing compassion to flow through, and you gain that insight. So I did it, you know. I thought I had love, but really, man, the more you practice, the more you realize, holy, like I was really lacking a lot of love and compassion for people. But that's that. See, this is where the spiritual bypass came in, which was like my my goal and my psychological processing of things came up in my practice. And it's like you have to be able to notice, oh, this is my mind now taking over and acting it out in a spiritual way, rather than just like, oh, this is actually just the byproduct of practice. But going back to compassion, feeling love for a person suffering, it's literally just that, defined as that, and you feel it. And to remember that all these love and kindness practices, compassion practices, they're all feeling based. You feel compassion. And to generate it, to constantly generate that for beings is so important. Because it starts to really, you start to purify even for yourself. We can be detached all we want with awareness and just see, oh, I see my traumas. Oh, I see like the who I was back then. Okay. But now when we practice compassion, we're seeing those phenomenons happen, those memories and the traumas, and now we're giving those things compassion now. We're giving ourselves the things that we wanted as a kid. Maybe you didn't have enough love. Maybe you were abused in different ways. Now you're giving yourself that compassion, that space, and things start to purify itself. You start to feel compassion for yourself, because there's a lot of things in the shadow, a lot of things in the back of the mind that we hide, that we don't want to send compassion to, or we fight against. Oh, I can't be, I don't know why I get angry in this way, or I don't know why I get upset in this way. And we fight it. Or when the moment we have anxiety, it goes like this. Oh God, I have anxiety. I shouldn't have anxiety. I hate this feeling. Okay, I'm gonna push it down or run away from it. Oh no, this makes it worse. Like, oh, let me push it further down. Right? It's just this constant back and forth. Or even with anger, it's like, I don't want to be angry. I'm gonna fight it. Oh no, it just grows and grows because you're constantly battling it in your mind. With compassion, it's like you can now send compassion to those sides. It's okay that you have these triggers and these sort of cycles come in. It's supposed to be very gentle. And when those things come up, you allow compassion to come through. These things need compassion more than anything else. Those moments of trauma or those programs that we have, they need compassion. But we think logically we shouldn't send compassion to things that are bad or that we feel is negative. More the reason why to. More the reason why to give them that love, that compassion.
Yeah, the final object in the Brahma Viharas, at least as taught in the commentaries, is the difficult person or the enemy. So a person that you actually have animosity towards, if there's such a person that exists, that may be yourself. The difficult person, the enemy may actually be you. And that is the case for some people, that more than any external person that could be the difficult object, it's actually them that's the difficult object, or that perceived side of them or aspect of them that is the difficult object. So, like I said, it's the final or it's the last object because it's harder to really face. So you work with uh, initially objects that you have, people that you have affinity towards, beings that you have affinity towards, then neutral beings, and then the actual the difficult person, whoever that is. And that's really I feel that's the real test of compassion, I remember, I think it was from a motivational speaker, actually, like Les Brown or something. He was a long time ago. He was saying, it's easy to have faith when everything's going good. When business is up and everything's working out and your relationships are fine. It's easy to have faith then. But when you've lost your business and your partner's left you and the electricity's been turned off and your car's about to be impounded, can you still have faith? It's like that with compassion and with the heart practices. Of course, it's easy to have compassion for the easy objects, or
Right.
for the familiar objects, and for the objects and beings we have affinity towards. But can we really have that same compassion and that same level of love for people and types of people, or people that have hurt us? That's really the test of how open the heart actually is. It's easy to have faith when things are good. It's easy to have compassion with your best friend, but is it easy to have compassion for the parent that hurt you, or the ex that hurt you, or yourself, when you consider the people that you've hurt or the things that you've done?
Or even like immediate experiences. Like the greatest example I can give was I had a tire I had a flat, and it was like 12 o'clock at night, and as that I was on the freeway, and I had to like go on the shoulder. I pulled onto the shoulder and I started changing my tire. Got the jack, cranked it, or had already, taken off the wheel. The moment I was about to put the spare on, the jack decided to fall. Okay, so the car fell and hit the rotor. And
Oh yeah.
in this moment, I started to practice love and kindness. I was like, I gotta show love and kindness to this circumstance. Right, I laughed because I was like, this is
I'm
the
getting so
universe.
pissed right now. That's hilarious.
I was like, okay, I was like, this is this immediate circumstance. This is my condition. I'm just gonna show love and kindness to it. And so I was practicing it naturally. It came up just naturally. And then I was like, okay. I looked at my tire and was like, okay, I'm gonna call AAA. After an hour and a half, waiting, they told me 45 minutes. It was an hour and a half. And I was on the side of the road outside. I couldn't go inside my car because I didn't want to smash the rotor more and put extra weight on it. So I was just like, I was sitting like this in the freeway, just waiting. And there's like all this dust that night. It was so windy. All these cars are speeding by. And I was like, may all beings be free from suffering. May I be happy. May they be happy. And I was generating it. Obviously, the mind was kind of battling at times, but there was moments where it was like it wasn't indifference. It was like there's love in this too. There's a lesson. I'm burning off karma, whatever it is. I don't know. This is what it is. That's very that's very difficult at times, but it's like the most necessary. Because like you were saying, it's so much easier to feel good when everything's good.
Yeah, well, and we'll touch this final point, and we'll close it out. Maybe some of you were thinking, like, what do you do about spiritual bypassing? I think sometimes, and for a lot of people, like, self-honesty is not an easy thing. We really need to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, how can we do a thing better in a given area of our life, and how we conduct ourselves, or how we're even talking to ourselves. My friend Monkey Nick, he's writing a book, or he's going to release a book called "You're Sick Because You're a Liar." And I think that can speak pretty well to this particular point, where we can't really lie to ourselves, but we try. We can't really deceive ourselves, but we try. We can't really get away from how it is that we feel about ourselves, but we try. And I think that we can use compassion and loving kindness and dharma in general to actually build up the power it takes to really face ourselves. I remember a time in my life where I didn't feel that I had anyone to rely on. and it felt like even all the Buddhas and all the beings that I used to pray to were silent, and that I really didn't have anything, not even myself. So I didn't even have myself in those moments. But I still sat down on that mat and on that cushion, and I still crossed my legs every day and straightened my back. I still opened Dharma books, and I still kept going even when my tank was very, very empty. So when it comes to our practice, even if we don't have faith, there's still the power of that practice that we can stand on. There's still the power of the work that you've done on yourself that you really need to acknowledge and draw from that. For many of you who are listening, a lot of you, a lot of my students, you've been doing spiritual work for not just a year or two. I mean, you've done it for maybe half of your lives, 5, 10, 15 years. So there's a lot of moments, and there's a lot that you've been through that is kind of just like sitting back there, and you may not really be drawing on it as much as you can, drawing the power and the wisdom out of those experiences, really looking for the lessons. Sometimes we can kind of just weave and, glide through things, but there's really gems in some of the things that we've been through and some of the things that we've overcome. And that's always a source of power, even if it's still operating from a sense of self and from a sense of me. Sometimes you need to do that just to get through a situation and to overcome a specific circumstance and condition. That is an example of not engaging in spiritual bypass. You're actually looking at a problem that you have. You know that that's an issue in your life, and instead of saying, like for me, I used to be like, well, when I was in my early 20s or whatever, I don't want to work. I don't want to work. That fits really well with the type of archetype that I am as a spiritual person. Like, you just want to meditate, you just want to read, like that's all that you want to do. But the thing is, if you have that frame and that's not the condition that you live in, that's not the reality, the society that you happen to exist in, then there's automatic discord, and that discord is going to cause suffering. So at that time, it became very clear. I was like, oh, I can't just keep avoiding this. I need to get out there and fix this part of my life and at least try. I mean, I failed, but at least I tried. I'm okay now, but at least I actually didn't just be like, you know what? I'm just gonna not be concerned about it, and I'm gonna sleep on people's couches and meditate all day. I had the sense that that probably wasn't the right way to approach this situation, and that I really had to look at myself and make changes and go for it. So
Yeah, man. I couldn't say it. It was awesome. I'm not gonna lie. I almost teared up. And just acknowledging, when pain is pain, happiness is happiness. Those things come naturally, they'll come and go. But also,
no, well, I guess Ricardo is gone. I'm not sure what happened there, but we're over the 45-minute mark, so I'm gonna close this out, and we'll be back again on Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific. If anyone has any questions, you could always send it in through Messenger, and we can use that as the topic for our next talk, and we're always happy to do that. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, and see all of you next week.